Welcome to Liberty Starship, where we go beyond the typical terrestrial talk. I am Eric Alexander, along with Peter Maines. Together, we are your crew and invite you to join us on the journey to discuss politics and current events. And as we like to do on this show, we're going to once again start with our daily distractions. As I have mentioned before, it's been a little difficult sometimes to find true daily distractions in terms of media coverage and just sort of silly stories that probably don't really belong in the main news feed. But I've got a couple for you here that I think are interesting. So I'm going to start out with something that's been very topical, and this is not. I want to be clear here. All right, this is a CNN Politics article. You've all heard about this, okay? This is dated May 4th, today. It's been updated. And it's a CNN Politics article, and it says, Pence says he should have worn a mask at the Mayo Clinic. I'm sure a lot of you have already heard about this. So it says, Vice President Mike Pence said Sunday that he should have worn a mask during his visit to the Mayo Clinic last week when he toured the renowned medical facility without one, despite their policy requiring it. And there's a picture here of Mike Pence. It looks like he is doing a elbow bump with a patient. The patient is masked up, it looks like. And then you've got several other people in the background. I don't know who they are, but they're all wearing masks. And this is something that's been pointed out. It's pointed out in the article. So Pence said, citing how often he's been tested for the virus, Pence said during a Fox News town hall, quote, I didn't think it was necessary, but I should have worn the mask at the Mayo Clinic. The concession comes after a maskless Pence thanked workers, conferred with hospital administrators, and spoke with a Mayo Clinic employee who was donating plasma at the facility. So I guess that's what that picture was. It's the person donating plasma. So this has been a quote unquote big story. I saw it without looking for it, without wanting to look for it. And it's been quite all over the news cycle, not just on CNN, but my local news station. It's been everywhere. And as you may know, I am an advocate of wearing masks in public. I am absolutely an advocate of that. And I do that myself when I go out on my supply runs or if I go on my walks, which I haven't been going on many walks lately because it's gotten hot in Arizona. So I need to incorporate that again. But I am an advocate of wearing masks. The problem I have with this coverage and the way that this has been presented is the fact of the matter is that Mike Pence was going to this hospital. They say they have this policy. And I guess they also tried to say that they made the vice president aware of this policy and he just ignored it or whatever. And I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know exactly what happened. There's some back and forth about exactly what was going on. But the fact of the matter is, I feel that this is incredibly, this is an example of hypocrisy in the media. Because literally just, I think, a week and a half ago, numerous governors, in fact, we covered this on our last show, which states are requiring masks. And I will tell you, I have looked at many images and also video of many of these governors making public announcements with the press present about requiring masks, and then they themselves are not wearing one. And this is again, these are public press conferences with members of the press, with other officials, usually standing right next to them, oftentimes standing right next to officials wearing masks, but they themselves are not wearing one. So I think the coverage of this has been very politically motivated. The fact of the matter is there's plenty of hypocrisy to go around. And the fact of the matter is Mike Pence is not requiring anyone to wear a mask. He doesn't have that authority and he hasn't tried. And he has his own bias, I'm sure. We've talked about the anti-mask bias in Western culture. That's Europe and the United States, Canada. They're all guilty parties as far as I'm concerned. But this man has not required anyone to wear a mask, and again, does not have the authority to do so. So then again, we have many governors who are requiring people to wear masks, and they themselves do not wear one. And that's where I think the hypocrisy is. And that's why I'm calling this a daily distraction and saying that this is not news. This is more or less just a way of discrediting and also trying to humiliate the vice president. Do you have any thoughts on that, Pete?
Yeah, you asked me about this, and I definitely think that he should have worn a mask. But I think this says a lot about Mike Pence's character. I love Mike Pence. I think he's a great leader. I think he was a great governor for Indiana. We've all followed him for a long time since he was one of the original Tea Partiers. He's very conservative. He's also very smart and very pragmatic. And I don't know exactly what his reasons were. I suppose he thought that the risk was relatively small, and as far as PR goes, it's hard to get good PR when you're wearing a mask. It almost defeats the purpose of having a photo shoot or a photo op. But at the same time, the fact that he has come back and essentially apologized for it, I think really speaks to his character. Not many politicians like to back down. Not many politicians like to admit that they made a mistake. And this is why we love Mike Pence. This is why I love Mike Pence, because he puts the truth first. He puts integrity first. And I think just good on him. I did call him out on the Twitter feed, and you even sent me a text message like, "Oh my God, you're going after Mike Pence," and I said, "Yeah, on the masks issue, doesn't affect how I feel about him. He his record speaks for itself. He is a true conservative. He is a true believer. He's somebody who has great integrity and who does what he says he'll do, which most people in office they fold like deck chairs. And Mike Pence is tough, but in this case, he was flexible enough because he's humble enough. And I wish we had more people like Mike Pence in office.
But what do you think about these governors who make these? They do these mask orders that have the force of law, that can require use of force. We've actually seen that. There's a viral video in New York where apparently there was some social distancing issue or something with the mask, and it's an ugly video, which, by the way, that's what it looks like when you actually do these orders. When you order people to do things like disperse because they're not supposed to gather more than 10 people, or you order them to wear masks, guess what, folks? You are inviting the police to do these things. And guess what? In New York City, they're not going to support these officers who are enforcing that order. Meanwhile,
No.
de Blasio is running around without a mask. I don't think I've ever seen him do a press conference with the mask on. I don't think I've ever seen Cuomo do a press conference with the mask on. And he was just talking about how masks, he said, if masks are uncomfortable, so what? Whatever, I don't care. Meanwhile, he's not wearing one. His brother wasn't wearing one when he had COVID-19 and was running around and getting into fights with bicyclists. But they're not covering that. That's why this is a daily distraction to me, Pete, is because we are not getting equal time. We're not getting equal coverage. And my point is that Pence neither has the authority, nor do I believe he has been part of the advocacy of forcing people to wear masks. And yet there are people that are forcing people to wear masks, like Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio. And I never seen them wear masks during their press conferences. And there are other people in the room. And so, and they're never called out on that. And that was my whole point of why I think this is a daily distraction.
Yeah, and the Chris Cuomo thing is really egregious because yes, his brother is the governor of New York, and here he is on television day after day telling us how to live our lives, and for him not to set the example, especially when he actually had Mike Pence, to the best of my knowledge, does not have coronavirus, and so if he's not wearing a mask, he's probably not going to spread it. He's probably not infected. And so the risk for him to do this is much lower than it was for Chris Cuomo. And as you said, getting in fights with bikers, that the guy who was riding his bicycle past his house, is really a low class move.
Who was an older man, by the way. And
Yes.
And Cuomo is like a bodybuilder, basically. I mean, he's
Right.
like a roid freak. And man, I won't even get into that anymore. I just again, the reason that I brought this up is because of the spin. And that's what I think the original intention of daily distractions always was, hey, look over here, everybody, look over here. Look at the right hand and don't look at what the left hand is doing. And this is a classic example of that, of governors who are absolute hypocrites, who are forcing people and using the force of law and using the police to enforce these orders, and they themselves don't wear masks, and they never get called out for it. The media never says, "Oh, this is hypocritical. Why isn't this mayor or this governor wearing a mask during this press conference? Why isn't he wearing a mask when he goes and visits a factory?" And they're not, and they haven't been, and it's because do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and it's become trite at this point to point out the left wing bias of the media. It's something that we've lived with our entire lives, and it's been blatant. It's been in your face. It's just gotten worse in recent years, but it's always been there. And for them to go after Mike Pence in such a way, but to we've heard crickets about Chris Cuomo. It shows where the media's priorities are. And we're seeing the same thing with the Tara Reade issue. Tara Reade was accused of sexual harassment, really sexual, or excuse me, she's accusing Joe Biden of sexual assault. She's not accused of anything. And if you look at her allegations and you compare that to what Dr. Blasey Ford was accusing Kavanaugh of in the hearings, there's no comparison. What Tara Reade is saying is very compelling because she's consistent, because she started decades ago telling her brother, telling her neighbor, and their stories are not identical to what she's saying right now. But I'm not seeing the contradictions. I've heard some people defending Joe Biden say there are contradictions in this woman's story, and I'm just not seeing it. It sounds to me like sometimes she sort of soft pedaled what happened to her, which is understandable. But it's one thing to soft pedal something, it's another thing to blatantly contradict yourself, which is what we saw with Dr. Ford's testimony, where Dr. Ford's story was all over the map over the course of decades, and we never even saw Kavanaugh's name until very, very late in the process. Basically, as soon as John Kavanaugh was nominated, that's when she knew it was John Kavanaugh, and so that to me doesn't pass the smell test. Whereas Tara Reade at least has been consistent for 27 years or so. Is it 27 or 23? I believe it was 27 years. She has said, "This is Joe Biden did this to me." Now, what that this is has grown a little bit. At first, she said, "I was harassed, I was intimidated, I felt uncomfortable." And she has been more forceful in recent years. Now, maybe with her mother, who is now passed, maybe she was more open and she said, "I was assaulted," but we don't know what she said to her mother because, like I said, her mother's dead. We're not going to be able to interrogate her at this point. But what it sounds to me, what it sounds like to me, is that Tara Reade was traumatized, that she had trouble telling the whole story. When she started sharing it, she would say, "Oh, Joe Biden hurt me." And then as she has grown more confident over the years, as the time between the trauma and present day has expanded, she's been she's been able to speak the truth. So I that's my read on this. Just the way that she tells the story, when
I,
even reading it in print, it
I want to.
strikes me as true.
I want to give just a little bit of general insight here. Okay, I do have 20 years of experience in public safety, and I was involved in numerous rape investigations over the
Yeah.
course of my career. And I'll tell you something something that's not talked about in the mainstream media. You don't hear talking heads talk about this because it's politically incorrect. But there are two things that are basically equally true when it comes to sexual assault in the real world and investigating sexual assault. I'll tell you right off the bat, the vast majority of the sexual assault, I should say, quote unquote, sexual assault cases I investigated regarding adults, okay, regarding adults, children are a different animal. Children are a very different animal. But regarding adults, were completely bogus. complete hogwash, complete crap. The reason for that, and I believe very sincerely the reason for that, is because of the shame issue, the shame and the humiliation issue of sexual assault. It is a very, very underreported crime, especially among men, by the way. Because think about if a man is sexually assaulted, if he wants to really tell anybody about that. But for women too, obviously, it is a very underreported crime. And yet, on the other side of it, many of the people that do come forward are quite frankly full of crap. So this is a hard thing. There's no easy answers when it comes to sexual assault investigations, and that's why that's why it can never be, oh, believe her or believe him. It's not a he or her or him or whatever issue. The fact of the matter is, again, these crimes are severely, severely underreported because of the humiliation factor. And many of the people that come forward forward for dubious reasons. Right. And that's what makes it so hard. I just wanted to mention that, Pete, from that perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, that is, and maybe you can give some insight. I have a few, just sort of I've looked at Joe Biden's interview with Mika Brzezinski. I've read what Tara Reade has said. I listened to her interview with Crystal Ball on the Hill. And so, just looking at it from an outsider, I don't know Tara Reade, of course. Very few of us do. Like I said, her story has grown organically. She's not all over the map. She doesn't seem like she's self-aggrandizing. This doesn't seem like she's trying to get a book deal, or she wants the public spotlight, or she's a rabid Joe Biden hater. Whereas with John Kavanaugh, Justice Kavanaugh, what you had was somebody who hated him, hated the Republican Party, seemed to have an agenda, and just plugged in his name in the allegations because it would hurt the Republican Party, because it would make it harder to get right-leaning justices on the Supreme Court. I don't see any of that in Tara Reade. I don't see any ulterior motives. And like I said, just hearing her story, it sounds to me legitimate. Now, that's just my gut. It's just my gut. I'm not infallible and I'm not psychic, but to me, it just sounds real. It sounds like the kind of details that somebody who experienced it would provide, as opposed to, it doesn't sound like the kind of story that you would invent. When we watched Joe Biden's interview, he looked weak. He did this weird thing that we've seen him do in previous interviews, where he did kind of a sad puppy, where Mika would ask him a question, they start getting into a little bit of crosstalk, and he would just kind of look down and look sad, and then he would say, "Oh no, you go ahead." What the hell is that? The guy's running for president. Just politically, he needs to be assertive. I know this is a serious issue, and this isn't all about politics. It's personal, but of course, the reason why we're talking about it is the political aspect. I thought that was very strange. I don't know what that says about the veracity of his side of it, but it just seemed very off, very odd to me. And he had a lot of answers where he started with "look," or the thing is, like, he wasn't prepared for really obvious questions. And the final weird thing was his insistence on not opening up the University of Delaware records. Why not? Why not say, "Yeah, I'm going to get everything on the table. We'll appoint a blue ribbon commission, or we'll get a private investigator, whatever it is, somebody who can be a neutral third party, who will go through the records. Just look for her name, and then if any document has her name on it, release it." And he kept saying, "No, there are no personnel records." Well, okay, have somebody look through those records. If this is true, have somebody go through those records. And so it seemed very strange, like he was perhaps very highly coached, but was still somehow unprepared for that interview. So he doesn't strike me as being very credible. I want to be fair to him, because this is a very serious allegation and nothing is proven. But so far, things really don't look very good for him.
I do want to say, just as a larger issue when it comes to sexual assault, this is why it's crucial to report the incident as in much of a timely fashion as possible. That lesson should be learned by everybody. It's not a right wing, left wing centrist. It has nothing to do with politics. It's important that if you are a victim of sexual assault, to report it as soon as possible. And there are evidentiary reasons for that. There are a myriad of reasons for that. Again, I understand the humiliation factor and how difficult that is, but I'm just going to say, from an investigator's standpoint, that's what you have to do, and that would help this current situation a lot as well.
Right. And there was one point where I thought that Joe Biden wasn't forceful enough in the interview, where I thought that he had a really good point when Mika was pressing him on, well, aren't you a hypocrite for saying believe all women? And I don't think his answer was the best. Again, he should have been prepared for that question. But what he said was, well, what I meant was that women should be given, there should be a presumption that women, or whoever, it could be men as well, are telling the truth. And the reason why that is, as you said, it's very embarrassing to come forward with allegations like this. So to presume does not mean that you simply assume that you do no investigation, but you're at least supportive enough that you give victims the space to tell their story. And those who are not victims, those who aren't being truthful, you can find that out. You can do your due diligence. And he made that point kind of, but it did look a little two-faced the way that he said it. It wasn't forceful enough and it wasn't clear enough. It looked kind of like dissembling, like he was improvising a little bit.
But
But
that
I
sounds like
think it's a fair point.
that sounds like a classic example of somebody talking out of both ends of their mouth. You know what I mean? That's it sounds like a little bit of backtracking. Listen, as an investigator, you can't presume anything. That's the bottom line. You can't believe him. You can't believe her. It's not a he she issue. Of course, we forget that there are many sexual assaults that are done by homosexuals as well. So sometimes it's a he, and a she. But the thing is that you don't take sides. As an
Right.
investigator, you have to come in objectively. You have to look at the evidence if it's there. Sometimes you don't have any evidence, and that's generally because they waited too long to make the report. So again, just from that perspective, without getting into the politics of it, I just want to advocate for people. If something like that happens to you, which right now I think that's happening in very large numbers, honestly, because a lot of people are basically trapped in their homes with predators, and that includes children. So if anything happens to you, report it right away. Report it as soon as you possibly can. Get out of that situation, and that will help you down the line with situations like this.
But don't you think that we're getting a little hung up on the word presume here? Because again, I think the intention of that slogan, whether or not it's the right combination of words, I think the intention and the feeling behind that and the insight is that we have to be supportive enough that victims feel comfortable telling their stories. Not that we don't do an investigation, not that we take sides, but we've gone from a culture where a lot of women are shamed for telling their stories, where women are treated presumptively as being liars. And the insight of that slogan is we need to correct a little bit. And maybe the way that's phrased is overcorrecting, but maybe that's just kind of a way of getting the discussion started. And yeah, that may not be exactly the way to look at it, but we did need to make a change in our society how we treat the victims of sexual assault.
I agree with that completely, except I think the whole, I believe her and that kind of stuff, that's a political statement. That has nothing to do with investigation. That has nothing to do with treating victims with decency and kindness. It's a political statement. It's a feminist statement in the worst sense of the word. It's not about equal rights. It's about believing women over men. That's why they say her. And like I said, the most underreported sexual assault is not women, I guarantee you. There's no way to know that for sure, but my experience tells me the most underreported sexual assault is men because they are extremely humiliated when that happens to them and they don't report it.
Well, fair enough. I think we have a great deal of agreement. What was your next news brief, Eric?
Actually, I all I had was another distraction. So why don't we just get into your next news brief? Because I think that it would be better to move along because I think you have a good story there.
Okay, yeah. We've talked in previous weeks about the housing market, and as I look at the amount of debt that Americans have, you can see that our debt has moved up in tandem with the price of houses. And if you look at inflation over, say, the past decade, I found this out in my research this past week, and I don't have a chart here to show everybody, but we've said inflation is about 2%. But if you include the price of rent, if you include the cost of your mortgage payment, it's actually gone up 5% every year. We've had 5% inflation. But we don't count the cost of living. That is, we don't count your rent. And why not? Because we have this idea that it's okay if the price of televisions go down. The price of clothing has gone down over the past century. The price of cars has gone down over the past 50 years. But the price of houses has always gone up. There's been a few corrections, usually minor. We had a big one in 2008, but we just take it for granted that it is normal and economically healthy for the price of houses to go up and up and up. And I've been thinking like this is wrong. The the price of a house in 1950, we threw this out the past couple episodes because I want to keep hitting it because I want people to understand. The price of a house in 1950 was twice the typical salary about. Today it's 5 times. So the price of a house in real terms is 2.5 times what it was in 1950. That's insane. And what that does is it locks in people who own real estate as being the winners, the incumbents, and people who are new entrants to the market have a hard time getting in. And this has affected millennials. Boomers are doing okay, but millennials are having a really hard time buying their first house. And so that doesn't strike me as a really healthy growth model. And I said, why is this? Because again, we have
Well,
all
Pete,
these examples. Yeah.
I have a question for you because we
Okay.
have talked about this several times, and I've
Yeah.
had some time to think about it. And I
Good.
actually reached out to a friend of mine who does real estate, and
Okay.
it's funny because his attitude is very much what you. It's very much the attitude of the people that I think you're railing against, and he's kind of a great example of it. Maybe sometime I'll try to get him on the show just to give his perspective. But he very much is in that mode of, the sky is the limit. And, even if you look at the 2008 crash, which of course was caused by the housing bubble, he's like, well, look at where we're at now. And look how it recovered and it's gone up and all that kind of stuff. But my question
Right.
is, and this was kind of my question to him, isn't this an indication of inflation? That's my question. Isn't this an indication of inflation, of real inflation? Because you talked about things like cars and clothes. And the reason the cost of cars and clothes has been able to go down is because of manufacturing and because it gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to make this stuff. But
Right.
what do you think as far as the effect of inflation, and that perhaps what we're seeing in the housing market is a reflection of where we're really at and how bad inflation really is?
Well, first of all, this is inflation, whether he agrees or not. This is inflation, and it's specifically a type of inflation called acid inflation. When we hit a crash like we hit in 2000 or 2008, what happens is we start pumping a lot of liquidity into the market. And we've seen the same thing with the Federal Reserve and also with just the profligate fiscal policy at the federal level, where we've suddenly cut everybody $1,200 checks. Right now, we've seen the federal debt, the national debt, go from 22 trillion to, well, really 23 trillion to almost 25 trillion overnight. We've seen it go up by $2 trillion in the past few months. And according to Andy Biggs, who is the congressman out of Arizona, he's the head of the Freedom Caucus, and he's a real budget hawk. He has been outspoken saying we're going to see the national debt will be $30 trillion by the end of the year. $30 trillion. So we've gone from 22 trillion to $30 trillion in a single year. We will, if we don't correct course at this point. And that doesn't seem sustainable to me. So as far as inflation, the reason why you don't see, say, the price of a gallon of milk going up the way you do the price of houses is two reasons. One, the government is very invested in propping up the price of houses. Every city council uses their zoning power to restrict the number of houses, and the at the national level, you have monetary policy, which is geared towards inflating this asset bubble. And what happens is the boomers, who are the incumbents, they say, well, I feel richer because I have all this equity in my house. And when I retire, I'm going to sell my house and I'm going to go to the suburbs or the exurbs or whatever. And I'm going to live on that money that I earned from owning a house all those years. But that's just a Ponzi scheme, because that house isn't a productive asset. Imagine if, instead of having all of Americans invest their disposable income into their houses twice as much as they did 70 years ago, 2.5 times actually. Imagine if more Americans were putting that money into American manufacturing, putting it into the stock market, so that way startups, American artificial intelligence companies, or whatever it is, whatever the next frontier of investment and technological innovation is, put your money there. But instead, we tell people to put their money into dead assets that aren't producing any value. That house depreciates, but the money is worth more because we have this hub and spoke model where everybody's expected to work in the center of town, in the downtown area, and then you live in the suburbs, and the suburbs get bigger and bigger as that inner ring expands over the years, and all the value is at the center of the town. But that's not sustainable. If you look at a city like San Francisco or New York City, where commutes are ridiculously long. I have never lived in Silicon Valley, but I've had a lot of coworkers where I'll work in one city and they'll be in New York City or they'll be in San Francisco, and they'll tell me, oh, I have to live 2 hours away from my office. And so I don't leave the house until 10. I telecommute from 7 to 10 or whatever the time frame is. I put in 4 hours at the office, and then I drive back before rush hour hits, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to afford my rent. And these are guys who are IT professionals. Okay, they're earning well into six figures. They might be earning $150,000, $200,000 a year, and they can't afford a house. That isn't sustainable. That doesn't make sense. And we've talked a lot about how a lot of these people should be telecommuting 100% of the time anyway. But the other thing that we should be doing is getting away from this hub and spoke model when we do central planning, or I should say city planning, which is a kind of central planning, unfortunately. When we do city planning, we should be, and this is where I want to talk about strong towns, and I'll talk about it more over the coming weeks because I'm reading more and more. It's a really fascinating theory that the cities that work the best are the cities that have avoided this hub and spoke model. New York and San Francisco are sort of at a breaking point. It's worked okay for them because New York has the financial sector and San Francisco has the IT sector. But the cities, what about everybody else who doesn't have something like that? They don't have Hollywood the way that LA does, for example. Well, the cities that work the best are the ones where you have distributed growth. So the Phoenix area, I think, approximates that somewhat, where you have downtown Phoenix, you have downtown Mesa, you have downtown Chandler, but you can live and work fairly. Your commute doesn't have to be 2 or 3 hours. You don't have people in Phoenix, for the most part, commuting 2 or 3 hours like you do in the Bay Area. Because if you live in Chandler, you can also work in Chandler. You have Wells Fargo, you have Intel, you have a lot of Fortune 500 companies right in Chandler, Arizona. On the other hand, you have bedroom communities like Gilbert, Arizona, where you don't have a lot of jobs because people are worried about the traffic. And I think that's going to blow up in their faces. And I've told the people who are running for city council.
By the way, when it comes to bedroom community, I don't think anybody beats Mesa. I remember, this was years ago. I remember there was a talk, I remember years and years ago, where they were saying what's sort of a decent economic model for a typical city. And it was something like at least 70, basically having at least enough jobs for 70% of your population. That was the number that was thrown to me. Okay, that was basically if you can employ about 70% of your people, if you have enough jobs in your city to do that, you're in good shape. At the time, now this was years ago, at the time, Mesa was like at 30%. They had enough jobs for 30% of their people, and the biggest employer in Mesa at the time, and I think to this day, was the Mesa School District, which is the largest school district in Arizona, which really tells you something. So, yeah. and I think the biggest independent private employer was Walmart. There are Walmarts everywhere in Mesa.
Right.
And at the same time, they also have, McDonnell Douglas is in Mesa. You know what I mean? That's where they build the Apache helicopter.
Right.
But that's not where most people are employed. So it's kind of interesting when you talk about this issue of the spoke and the wheel, because what happened in a lot of communities in the Phoenix metro area, and this is not this happened in many other communities as well, is there was actually intense neglect of their downtowns. Intense neglect. Mesa is a great example. Downtown Mesa is there's almost nothing there, except for the Mesa Art Center and the Convention Center, which is very small. There's almost nothing in downtown Mesa. So in terms of this spoken wheel that you're talking about, many communities out here had intense neglect of their downtowns. And Chandler's a good example. Phoenix is a good example of these places where there's been a revitalization of their downtowns, as opposed to, say, Tempe, that has had a pretty robust downtown for decades, and also Scottsdale has had a robust downtown for decades as well. But they're based more on the social model of bars and restaurants and things like that, as opposed to, well, now in Tempe, you're seeing a lot of office space go up. So it's kind of interesting because on the one hand, it's I think a lot of what you're saying is absolutely on the mark when you're talking about places like New York and you're talking about places like San Francisco. But there is another side to this of many cities that their downtowns have been in complete neglect for decades. And only in, say, the last 10 years or so have we seen a revitalization of their downtowns, which are actually fueled, as far as I can tell, by urban living. A lot of people like the idea of living in a high rise. They like the idea of having a loft. You know what I mean? That's where I'm seeing a
Yes.
lot of the growth in downtown places.
Right. And that's, that's really good. It can be good depending on exactly how it's done. And there's a lot of factors here. But being able to walk around your neighborhood is a really big deal. And there should be parks within walking distance. There should be restaurants and perhaps bars. And, we can talk exactly about what your downtown should look like. But a lot of people are worried about crime and they're worried about traffic. But think about Arizona. The biggest problem with Arizona is as far as just sort of social, the social aspect and the city planning aspect of it is that people don't know their neighbors. There's no real sense of community in a lot of neighborhoods. And that's because people can't walk around. If you're going to go to the store, you go to Walmart or you go to a big box store. And if you want to go to a restaurant, you go to a chain restaurant. And it's going to be at a strip mall and it's not going to be that close. The strong towns model is very critical of that because these big boxes, first of all, they're built cheaply. Those buildings don't last forever. Whereas a strong downtown, typically these are buildings that will last a long time. These are businesses. Think of downtown Chandler. I don't know if you've been. You have Saba's Western Wear, for example, down there. It's kind of a kooky little, um, it is a chain, but it's a local chain, and you get the sense that this is going to be here for a long time. You look at the businesses around there, they're not planning to move out. Whereas Walmart, they'll move in, their building will be ready to demolish in 20 years, 20, 25 years, and then they move on. And your city then loses that anchor, and you start seeing blight. And economically, it's not good. The city has you collect less in taxes, in sales taxes from an area like that over the long term, and so it's just a lose lose for the city. People think that the big box model of growth is going to work, but it's just a way of sort of kicking the can down the road. It assumes you're just going to get more and more people coming in to pay taxes because, oh, you have a Walmart. That's what people used to say about malls. And who goes to malls anymore, especially with COVID? But even before that, even a year ago, I was reading, and we've been reading this for years, that something like 75% of malls are expected to close in the coming years because it doesn't make sense. It's not really a good shopping experience. It doesn't foster a sense of community because it's just so cookie cutter. You could be anywhere in the country and the mall would look exactly the same. And is that what builds a community over time? It absolutely isn't. And to tie this all together, if we had a more distributed model, there would be a lot of benefits. Part of it would be resilience when you have an economic downturn because people are more invested in your city. It's not like Walmart where they're ready to pick up sticks as soon as things get tough. And what we find is that the more distributed old time Main Street, like if you think of how Mayberry looked in the old TV show, the Andy Griffith show, that our idea of Main Street turns out to be the best way to build a city according to the data. And I'm going to bring this out over the coming weeks because it's a really exciting theory, but we've already gone over time on this. So I would just sort of wrap this up by saying we have a lot of things in our economy right now that are built up as Ponzi schemes that are built up as the sort of boomer idea of the population is going to continue to explode and other people will buy our house. So there'll be 5 people in the future who want to buy our house. And so we'll make a huge profit off of it. And boy, that gravy train is never going to run dry. And we're at the point where the next generation cannot buy houses. And that tells me we are at the breaking point. If you want to know why Bernie Sanders, and I have talked about this to a degree, why is Bernie Sanders so popular? I think a lot of people are mistaken. They think that the young people just want free stuff. And I think, okay, yeah, that's probably a part of it. But I think the bigger part of it is that the older generation talks capitalism, but what they actually practice is an unsustainable growth model that excludes young people. And so young people say, well, if capitalism, as it's practiced, the sort of crony capitalism, infinite growth pyramid scheme model doesn't work, and that's their idea of capitalism because that's what we're doing, then maybe give socialism a try. And I think the older generation has done the younger generation a great disservice by not thinking ahead, by following really irresponsible policy on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, spending in general. And now the chickens are coming home to roost.
Yeah, uncontrolled spending is definitely a problem. And to kind of get back to
Yeah.
my earlier question, I think this is what also causes this inflation effect. It's
Right.
the major cause of this inflation effect.
Yeah. And I want to hit that point really well. Right now, we are seeing deflation because a lot of loans are going to go bad. A lot of people they took out loans to support their business. Those are going to go away. People are going to default on their mortgages. People are going to default on their business loans. People are going to default on a lot of credit. And that by definition is deflation. And so we're going to see deflation. We're going to see the price of houses go down. We've already seen the price of oil collapse. We're going to see other assets, other commodities go down. And that is asset deflation. And then we're going to see asset inflation again because the Federal Reserve and Congress are going to pump as much money into the economy as they can because they don't want the Ponzi scheme to be exposed. They don't want a lot of these bad investments to go bad. They want to keep the hamster wheel going just a little bit longer until maybe they retire from office so that they don't get blamed. But right now, we're seeing the head of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, has said this is the worst economy in U.S. history. And we're all sitting around saying, well, things are going to be fine in the fall. Everything's going to turn around. And I don't think so. I think this time we're not going to just spend and inflate our way out of this mess. I think we're actually going to have to deal with this in a real way. And to a large degree, it is the old against the young. It is the millennials versus the boomers. And I think the boomers need to wise up that they cannot continue to go along with the status quo, to make the same bad decisions they've made their entire political lives, because it is hurting our country. It hasn't led to a sustainable, healthy growth model, and it has to end.
Yeah, definitely can't just be business as usual. And one of the themes that we've had quite a bit on this show is that, again, folks, what's happening right now, in many regards, is not about the COVID-19 crisis, especially when we're talking about economics. What we are doing is we are exposing the cracks that were already there, the rot that was already there. And now we're starting to see those chickens coming home to roost, so to speak. So
Yeah.
There are fundamental flaws. But here's something, as far as something that is, in my opinion, very much inspired by the pandemic and a result of the pandemic. For my main segment, I have a tale of three sheriffs. And to start this out, I'm going to talk about my massive disappointment about what's going on in my state and the actions of Governor Ducey, someone who I've defended quite a bit because I was actually quite proud of Governor Ducey's handling of the pandemic crisis, and I thought that he was taking a much more middle ground position. One of the things that Governor Ducey did initially when he first started his shelter-in-place order, which he didn't call it shelter-in-place, but it is a shelter-in-place order. Everybody regards it as one because it does have the force of law. He actually mentioned at first that salons and barbershops would be allowed to stay open. And then after intense pressure from Kyrsten Sinema and the Democrats, particularly like Gallegos, I call them, I'm sorry, the term is eluding me. But basically the usual suspects. I call them the usual suspects. Starts with Sinema, then it goes to the mayor of Flagstaff, then the mayor of Tucson, and then the mayor of Phoenix, who are all Democrats and believe in taking all your freedoms away as much as possible and exploiting this crisis in any way they possibly can. So one of the first chinks in the armor, if you will, was Ducey caving in and closing the salons and the barbershops. And so a lot of us were hoping that as of May 1st, when Governor Ducey's order expired, the salons would be allowed to open again with extensive guidelines. Certainly retail would be allowed to open again, and that hasn't been the case. So this is a news release from the 1st of May from Governor Ducey's office. It says, Governor Ducey, the Arizona Department of Health Services released guidelines for retail businesses and customers as openings resume next week. So if we get down to here about what some of the guidelines are, basically they're taking this sort of phased approach to opening up retail businesses, basically saying that starting today, Monday, that May 4th, retail businesses can sell goods through delivery service, window service, walk-up service, drive-through service, drive-up service, curbside delivery, or appointment, provided they implement sanitation and physical distancing measures. I'm going to tell you something, folks. That was happening anyway, okay? That was already happening. There was no way to police this specific area that he's talking about. If a business wanted to operate and allow people to come and pick up items at their business, nobody was stopping them. So in effect, this measure doesn't mean anything, except that the people that were really scared of fines are now able to do what everybody else was already doing anyway. It says on Friday, May 8th, businesses can resume partial openings that incorporate social distancing and sanitation measures established by the United States Department of Labor or the Arizona Department of Health Services. That's interesting too. So you can go with either rule. I don't quite understand that. But anyway, as of Friday, May 8th, they are going to basically allow retail businesses to start opening with a limited capacity, which again, I think that's something that should have happened May 1st. That should be in effect right now. Today's measure, I think, is silly because people were doing that anyway. You couldn't stop this. Under the executive order, businesses were still allowed, business owners were still allowed to go to their place of business and do things like mail order. Okay. They were allowed to go to their business and, look at their inventory, set up an online store and start doing mail order services. You don't think they weren't doing pickup? I know they were doing pickup because I went to a business that did that because I didn't want to pay the shipping cost. So I went to the business and picked up the item that I was buying. So it was happening anyway. This to me is very much a half measure and unnecessary, and I don't understand it. Other than the usual suspects that I feel like have the ear of the governor now for some reason, and he's listening to their bad advice and stuff that's not based on any kind of science or anything like that. It's just, I don't know. I was very disappointed. I got emotional about it, and I feel like there has to be a better way. Well, here's what the Maricopa County Sheriff decided to do with all this stuff going on. And again, this is the tale of three sheriffs. So this is Sheriff number one. I voted for Paul Penzone. I voted for him because I was very upset that Sheriff Arpaio got himself into the mess that he got himself in. I don't think a sitting sheriff should be under indictment from the feds. I don't. I think that's a bad look, and I was not willing to support that. And I am a registered Republican, and I voted for Penzone. Okay. So Penzone says efforts to manage MCSO resources being misrepresented. And this is hot off the presses. This is dated today at 11:35 a.m. So this is only a few hours old. It says, despite what you may have seen on social media, Maricopa County Sheriff Paul Penzone said he isn't encouraging citizens to snitch on fellow Arizonans over violations of the state's coronavirus stay-at-home order. In fact, his deputies aren't making arrests or writing citations related to the order. As far as I know, that is true, okay? But I have heard multiple reports that deputies have shown up at businesses that plan to open on Friday because many businesses were going to open on Friday. That's a fact. And I have heard many accounts that deputies showed up at those businesses because those businesses were ratted on by somebody, and they were told if they opened up, they were going to face extensive fines and the loss of their business license. I've seen many reports of that from individual people reporting that happened to them as they were preparing to open. And I know for a fact many businesses were preparing to open on Friday because Governor Ducey dragged his feet for a very long time, and nobody knew what was going to happen. And everybody assumed once his order expired, businesses could reopen. And then he decided to, at the last minute, he decided to go ahead and extend his order until mid-May. So what is the sheriff doing, and what is he advocating in his own words? So as we go down this article, he said, Penzone said civilian investigators will look into tips and report back to supervisors who will in turn determine whether Metro Phoenix deputies should be dispatched. Says, and rather than arrest possible violators or write tickets, deputies will leave it up to the Maricopa County's attorney's office to decide if charges should be pressed. Quote, we are just going to write up a report and let the prosecutor's office determine if in fact there is a criminal offense, he said. So what he's saying is absolutely he is encouraging the Rat Patrol, and he's deferring it to someone else because he doesn't have the guts to make a determination on his own that, you know what, we're not going to enforce these stupid orders. They're not constitutional. They're a waste of my deputies' times. The MCSO is not an agency that has anywhere near unlimited resources. I worked with MCSO during my 20-year career extensively, and I'll tell you, they were always lacking personnel. They were always never had enough deputies. They are a critically undermanned agency. And the fact that he's wasting any resources on this at all, where he's basically out there videotaping, recording people, and then making cases and sending them to the prosecutor's office so he can make the determination about whether he wants to go after these people or not, is just pathetic. I think it's pathetic. And I am going to be looking for an alternative to this sheriff come election time. I'll tell you that.
Well, the RLC of Arizona has already endorsed an alternative, and I'll look his name up here in a second. But we do have choices, and this is why it's important to have Republican sheriffs. Now, we've talked a little bit on the show about people talking in politics, talking about out of both sides of their mouths, and this is a clear example where you have them on one hand saying, "We're not writing anybody citations." Oh, but we'll send it to the prosecutor. So they want to be able to have plausible deniability later. At least they want to muddy the issue enough so that when this becomes an election issue in November, they'll say, well, hey, you were allowed to open your business. There was no penalty for opening your business. We're not crushing businesses. We didn't cause this damage, but clearly they did. And so it is a really disgusting political game that they're playing right now. And Doug Ducey has gone along with it. But what you have is these, in many counties, health inspectors running around threatening businesses, and it's almost like vigilantism, where they're making threats, but they're not really willing to put their name on it. Oh, I'm not going to issue you a citation, but maybe you'll get fined later. Maybe you will lose your liquor license. Doug Ducey said that if these businesses open up, that they could lose their liquor licenses. And what is that if not a threat? So they say, oh, it's voluntary. Oh, it's not an order. It's just a nice suggestion.
No,
Baloney.
no, 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 it is not. And we've talked about the order, and it does have teeth. And to kind of end this on a more positive note, because this is a tale of three sheriffs, not just one. Two Arizona sheriffs say that they won't enforce the governor's stay-at-home order. This article is dated yesterday. This is from thehill.com. And it says, two county sheriffs in Arizona say they will not be enforcing Governor Ducey's stay-at-home order amid the novel coronavirus pandemic. According to the Arizona Republic, Mojave County Sheriff Doug Schuster and Pinal County Sheriff Mark Lamb have both said they will not arrest or hand out fines to those violating a stay-at-home order issued by Ducey that seeks to limit the spread of the novel coronavirus. And of course, this article, points out the deadly nature of the coronavirus, because of course they have to put some sort of spin there that these sheriffs are irresponsible. Well, in my opinion, these sheriffs are heroes. Doug Schuster and Mark Lamb. If I can, I will try to advocate for you and your campaigns. I've got to look and find when you guys are up for re-election, because I need to send some money your way personally and need to advocate for others to do the same. These are the definition of constitutional sheriffs. This is something that's been advocated for a long time by many people in the liberty movement, that we need constitutional sheriffs, and these are examples of these kinds of men. Not Penzone, who is deferring to the county attorney's office, which, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, that's also what's called a long-form complaint. And what that is that's an arrest that happens behind your back that you never know about unless somebody tells you. If they're submitting cases to the county attorney for review, that is actually a long-form arrest. And basically what they're doing is deferring to the county attorney as far as doing a physical arrest, but that is an arrest. If I understand what Penzone is doing. So I just wanted to point out those two sheriffs as examples of what you should be doing, and an example of Penzone as something as someone not to emulate. And I do want to leave with this as well, because I did share this before, and I'm just going to go with the headline here, and let's put some teeth on the other end of this, and cap this off with another time where I advocate the 14th Amendment. And this article says,
before we move on, both of those sheriffs are up for re-election this year. And so they're running for re-election this year, and so is Penzone. So if you want to make a difference, this is the year to replace Penzone with somebody more responsible, somebody who is going to protect your rights, and re-elect Schuster and Mark Lamb.
There you go. And this is from the Washington Times. It says Barr, which is our Attorney General for the United States, Barr orders legal action against governors whose COVID-19 actions infringe on civil rights. I won't get into more of the meat of this article. I'm just saying you have every right to call your local U.S. attorney and file a complaint against your local police, your local sheriff, your mayor, your governor. You have a legal right to do that under the 14th Amendment, and you should exercise that right.
Yeah, and you and I have gone back and forth a little bit on this. That you've been so angry that you're like, hey, the U.S. Marshals should arrest these politicians right away, put them in jail. They're violating the Constitution. And I've said, hey, we need to take them to court.
That's an emotional reaction, and I apologize for that. That was an emotional reaction, not a rational reaction. But that is where it would lead to. If Attorney Barr does investigate these people, it would be the U.S. Marshal's Office that would arrest these people for violations of the Civil Rights Act and violations of the 14th Amendment. That part is true. I'm just getting ahead of myself. I got ahead of myself because I was emotional.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I see we agree on that now. Boy, I was hoping we could really tear it up here. But well, we do have separation of powers, but these are unconstitutional orders in many cases. And I understand why we allowed it to go this far, because in an emergency, if let's say the United States is attacked, as we were on Pearl Harbor, at Pearl Harbor, nobody denies that the president has the right to immediately call out the military to defend our shores. And when we had this outbreak, a lot of people panicked and said, okay, well, these orders, we don't know if constitutionally they're exactly the right thing to do, but we're willing to give our elected officials the benefit of the doubt, because what is the alternative? That we do nothing? But now it's been a month and a half, and we have city councils, and we have Congress, and we have the courts, and we have all of these avenues to debate and discuss it. And you've been hitting this from the very beginning, the LA model, where these mayors are declaring emergency orders, and then the emergency just continues indefinitely. That's not what an emergency is. We should by now have a plan that we've discussed, debated, and voted on. If not the people, then their representatives voted on. But instead, as you've said, these little dictators are just imposing their will with no checks, no balances. It's just unilateral order. And this goes against everything that America is about. This goes against everything that our founding fathers stood for. And I think the American people are sort of at a breaking point. We're willing to give our leaders the benefit of the doubt, but at the same time, we need to calm down. We need to do things the right way. And if we're not willing to do that, then what's the point of having elections in the first place?
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. The general window we talk about in an emergency is basically 30 days. That's always been kind of the standard. After that
Any
point, it's no longer, an emergency executive declaration or executive call, because it takes time to reconvene legislatures. It takes time to reconvene city councils. It takes time to reconvene Congress. I agree with that. I understand that. Sometimes legislatures are very slow moving. That's why we generally defer to the executive branch for emergencies. But we're past that point. That's my point. We're past that point. And I say 100%, if you see violations of your local police, if you're concerned about what your mayor's doing, if you're concerned about what your governor's doing, call your U.S. Attorney's office. You have that right. That is absolutely within your power to do so, and file a complaint on them. The same way that people are ratting out businesses that are opening up too early, you have a recourse as well. Make a report to the U.S. Attorney's office.
Right, and I don't know how long it takes to drive across the city of Phoenix from north to south. What is it? An hour and a half, maybe? This is not like the old days when you would take your horse from wherever, Massachusetts, say, down to the capital. Okay, and that could take days or weeks. This isn't the colonial era. Now we have Zoom, and we have cars, and we have freeways, and we can convene a lot faster. So I think 30 days is probably way too much time. But if but give them time to debate, give them time to deliberate and come up with a plan. And maybe that does take 30 days. I don't know. That sounds
By
like
the
a
way, no,
long
that's a
time to me.
great, Pete, that's a great point, because the 30-day window, by the way, it's not like the Constitution. I'm talking about, traditionally how long these orders go in effect before they have to have any substantial review. But you're right. Technology makes a lot of these debates not even worth having, because in terms of the executive privilege, if you will, and their ability to manage a crisis, within, say, 10, 15 days, a legislature should be able to reconvene virtually if necessary, and review this process, and either slow it down, accelerate it, whatever they're going to do. But it should have some sort of review by the local legislature or the national legislature, whatever the case may be. And what we've seen is, and we've seen it for decades, the legislatures continue to erode their own authority at the power of the executive. And that's a dangerous thing. It's a dangerous thing. And I do commend President Trump, because he has not declared martial law. He has not used that executive authority, even though people were begging him to do that. He hasn't done that. And to me, he should get real credit for that.
Yeah, I think he does deserve a lot of credit. And it's unfortunate that his poll numbers right now they're just not strong enough to win re-election. And I'd like to pivot to what we're going to see in November, because we are running a little bit late. But what we've seen is, in many ways, the president's platform in 2016 was the perfect platform for right now. He was talking about things like manufacturing. Right now, we're starting to talk about shortages. And why? Because we don't have manufacturing here in the United States. Or the manufacturing that we do have, the supply chain is fragile. And so we've had this catastrophe. And even if you don't think, I hear a lot of people saying that, well, coronavirus is overblown. Okay. What I said today on Twitter was, treat this as a fire drill. Let's say you don't think coronavirus is that big a deal. What if in the future, in the near future perhaps, China or another hostile power releases a biological agent on US soil, and you start seeing hundreds of thousands, millions of Americans dying in very short order? We are unprepared. And we've talked about self-driving trucks. And the reason I brought that up was because, well, that's a vector. And this goes to the strong towns thing, that we want to have Main Street. We want to be able to quarantine, but still be self-contained, self-reliant. In the case that a disaster strikes, we're not having to venture out of our city, having to spread the virus all over the country. If we do need to do trade, if we do need to trade with other cities and states and countries, well, we can do that with a lot fewer touches today than we had to 100 years ago. And so we should be leveraging technology to do more telecommuting, more. If the legislature can convene online, your business can. If you have an office in San Francisco, you don't have to fly out to San Francisco anymore. But this I think meshes very well with Trump's strengths, but he needs to be more forceful and more articulate in getting that across, because this is, if you want to talk about the suburban moms, which is where he's really having trouble, their big issue is and will be security. They're less worried even about the economy, because if you live in the suburbs, you're more likely to be able to telecommute. But you're still worried about the number of deaths in New York City. You're still worried about the number of deaths nationwide. He should be hitting that so hard right now. But, if you look at the latest polls, well, let's look at how he has handled the past couple bounces. After the Mueller investigation collapsed, it was clear there was a witch hunt out, that there were a lot of people out to get him. And okay, he saw a bounce for a few days, and then it immediately evaporated. That's not good. That's not the sign of a good politician. He's not able to lock in gains when he beats his opponents in these political debates. He's not able to lock them in, because we're in this spin cycle, news cycle, where everything is moving so fast and it just goes in circles, and there's no memory of what happened. And so he's not been able to establish campaign themes, in my opinion. And I understand that's part of his strategy, that when people sort of throw stuff at the wall to attack him, like Bleachgate and so on, his strategy has been to sort of flood the zone, as Steve Bannon would say, which is distract everybody and move on to the next topic. But that works both ways, because when he really has something important to say, well, we're off to the next topic. And so what he's saying about manufacturing doesn't stick. And I think it's so important. And we can look at he's already wasted the rally around the flag effect, because he hasn't been able to get his message across, and he hasn't been consistent. He hasn't looked like a strong leader, even though he said he was a wartime president on this coronavirus thing. He has looked weak. Cuomo, Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York, has a 77% approval rating, and Trump is struggling to break 45%.
Let's talk about Cuomo. Let's talk about this idea, because I know you've tweeted about it quite a bit. A lot of people think that Biden is not going to be the nominee, that everybody wants Cuomo now, and that Cuomo is going to be drafted somehow.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it, because that's something people are interested in, I think. I
Well,
am.
yeah, at the convention, the dirty little secret about conventions is that there are no rules. It is a no holds barred cage match, and whoever comes out on top at the end of a convention is the winner. Because if you lose a convention and somebody tries to sue you, what the courts will say is, too bad, you're acting like toddlers. You have a clubhouse, you have your rules, and you couldn't even obey your own rules. So I'm not going to clean up this mess for you. And I've seen it happen at convention after convention where people say, "Oh, that's unfair, and I'm going to sue, and there's going to be a lawsuit." And it never comes to anything. And so anything could happen when the Democrats come to their convention. But their constraint is not what you can do at a convention, because they can do anything. The constraint is, will the Democrats, will the independents that they need to bring along with them accept the result? And you're going to have, let's say they throw Biden under the bus. Okay, he's done. What about all of those Bernie supporters
Maybe
who,
maybe he has an unfortunate accident, let's say.
yeah, and hey, he's not in great health. I think it's entirely possible he could have a heart attack or a stroke or some other medical emergency. Legitimately. I'm not saying that somebody's going to take him out like a mafia hit. I'm saying he is not in
That
good
was what
health.
I was implying. That was what I was trying to imply right there. So I want to be
Yeah,
clear.
sure. Yeah, it could happen. But it could also be just he could have a medical emergency between now and then, just the pressure of being in this race that would force him out, or at the very least give him the pretext he needs to step aside gracefully for the good of the party. Could happen. But what about all of those Bernie supporters who say, hey, Bernie Sanders came in second? Why doesn't Bernie Sanders get to be the nominee? Shouldn't he be the presumptive nominee? And the answer to that, of course, from a pragmatic point of view, is Bernie Sanders is a communist. He's a radical extremist. He calls himself a social democrat or a democratic socialist, but he's an old time Marxist. That's what he really is, and I think he's probably too extreme for the country. On the other hand, I think there's a lot of people who were just sort of checked out. I It's not impossible that Bernie Sanders could become the president if he won the nomination. But if I'm one of the people in the smoke-filled room, if I'm one of the super delegates on the Democratic side, I'm saying a couple things. I'm thinking a couple things. One is Joe Biden and this Tara Reade thing. Uh, that could be really toxic in November. If that gets hit really hard, we could see Joe Biden do just be embarrassed.
But do you see the media really going with that? I don't see the mainstream media really picking up that story any more
No,
than they already have. So
no, the media
I don't think
won't.
that's going anywhere.
The media won't. So it would be incumbent upon the Trump campaign to really go guerrilla and start hyping the heck out of this through alternative channels. And maybe it's putting out billboards. I mean, they could get creative because the social media companies are going to be against them. The TV stations, radio. Well, you have talk radio, which is going to be supporting him, but talk radio only talks to a very small audience. And so I think a lot of the media companies are just going to be against him, and they're not going to let them get their message out. But
Especially now because people aren't doing their commutes. That's one of
right,
the big draws of talk radio is people doing those long commutes you were talking about earlier, those long
right.
commutes into work.
So I think it would be very hard. But if you are in the leadership of the Democratic Party, you are worried. Well, what if they do figure out a way? What if they do crack the code? That could be a big problem. And so they're going to want someone like Andrew Cuomo there because Andrew Cuomo is popular. Andrew Cuomo is articulate. Biden looked like a punching bag when he was, this whole hang dog, puppy dog look like, well, okay, Mika, continue your point. He doesn't seem like a fighter to me. And I don't think that's going to play well in the debates. But at the same time, uh, he's leading all the polls right now. It's absolutely it's wild that he's up in Minnesota by 12 points, up in Pennsylvania by 6, in Michigan by about 5 or 6 points, Ohio by 6 points, Wisconsin by 3, Arizona by 4. So you just go down the list. You know, if things don't change, if the Democrats are able to just hold on to the wheel and things kind of go in the direction they're going, Trump is going to lose in a blowout. And I think a lot of Republicans are complacent and they're like, well, he's popular and the polls were wrong. The polls weren't wrong last time. But if there's one other saving grace, there's Tara Reade, but there's also Justin Amash, which you mentioned in the title here, the Amash in the room. Justin Amash, in my opinion, will take more votes away from the Democrat, from Joe Biden or Andrew Cuomo or Bernie Sanders, if we have something crazy happen in the next couple months. He will take more votes away from the anti-Trump candidate than he will from the pro-Trump candidate. And you have Jesse Ventura jumping in, who similarly will divide the anti-Trump vote. So if Trump has
Wait. I didn't even hear about Ventura. When did that happen?
Yeah, he's jumping in. He threw his hat in the ring. He wants to run for the Green Party nomination. And he previously was in the Reform Party with Ross Perot and Donald Trump, actually. And so it'd be a really wild race.
We got to do a show on that. I didn't even know that Ventura was looking to get in the race.
Yeah, and Ventura is not your typical Green Party candidate, but he's also not your typical right winger. He is
he's not your typical anything, Pete.
No, he's not. And so he's a real wild card in this race. But I think he would be more of a Ralph Nader type who would really hurt whoever the Democratic nominee is. But right now, I think there's a lot of voters. So if those third-party candidates catch fire,
Pete, let's back up a second. Okay, so you're asserting something that's counterintuitive to most people in established political circles, because in established political circles, the fight is always between the Libertarian Party and the Republican Party. In other words, the Libertarians, traditionally, they're thought to take votes away from Republicans. And as you mentioned, traditionally, the Green Party is thought to take votes away from the Democrats. So I want to back up on this, that you believe that that Congressman Amash might actually hurt the Democrats more than the Republicans. I would like to elaborate on that, because that is counterintuitive to what most people say.
Okay. That's a really good point. I want to say it was 10 years ago in Arizona, the Republican delegation lost 3 key seats, and we haven't been able to win back our congressional delegation since. And the reason why the Republicans lost in Arizona, because you have 9 districts and you had 3 seats flipped to the Democrats. What happened was you had 3 Libertarian candidates who took votes away from the Republicans in those races. In fact, one in District 9, which is where Kyrsten Sinema got elected, that's how Kyrsten Sinema got elected, was the Libertarian in that race took about 10% of the vote, which kept Vernon Parker out. It allowed Kyrsten Sinema to win. And now Kyrsten Sinema is our senator. And boy, is she gearing up to run for president in the near future. Don't be surprised if our first woman president is Kyrsten Sinema. So traditionally...
Not if I have anything to say about it, Pete. Not if I have anything to say about it.
Well, I think, okay. So, yeah, we have our problems with Sinema, but she is a very savvy politician. But in Virginia, Ken Cuccinelli, you know Ken Cuccinelli, he was the guy who threw his credentials down in 2016, said he wouldn't vote for President Trump no matter what. He was a never Trumper, and now he's a member of the Trump cabinet or the Trump administration. He's a very conservative guy, and he ran against a Democrat and a Libertarian, and the Libertarian was not your doctrinaire Libertarian. And he advocated things like, we're going to have a fuel tax, but because we have electric cars, well, those electric cars don't burn oil. They don't burn gasoline in their tanks, I should say. And so we need to put tracking in every car to see how many miles you drive, to see how much of Virginia roads you're using. That's not very libertarian, but you see a lot of these ideas coming from so-called libertarians.
Yeah, there was an issue. There was an issue that I was quite aware of, where people, and that, by the way, that happens with the Green Party in Arizona as well, because I actually knew a Green Party candidate. In fact, I even brought her to one of our forums. I'm not sure if you met her, but
yes,
and she was not very green, to be honest with you. You know what I mean? So a lot of people use the third parties because they're relatively easy to run, and then you get they might have a spot on the ballot. And that happens. There's no doubt that happens with both the Green Party and the Libertarian Party, that they aren't necessarily very ideologically green, not very ideologically libertarian, but they somehow get on the ticket anyway.
Yeah, my favorite Green Party candidates, some political genius in Arizona, a Republican, went up and down Mill Avenue and recruited all the homeless people to run for office as Green Party candidates in order to split the Democrat vote. I thought that was the most hilarious thing because in Arizona, you have a voters guide that comes out where everybody who's running for office gets a paragraph and they say, "This is what I stand for." And it was all these homeless people writing, "Yeah, me and my buddy Scooter rode out here, and we got kicked out of college, and I think that was totally bogus, dude. And I don't think that should be allowed." And it was like, oh my gosh, where did these find these people? But it was very effective. But back to Amash, I think Amash, even though he's Mr. Conservative, he's far right on almost every issue. But you have a lot of people.
Well, I want to say that I don't think I would call him far right. I think because most people when they hear far right, they think he's a fascist or something. Because
He's not.
Most people have we've talked about this before. Most people have that traditional view of politics that I think is completely wrong. I think when it comes to right and left, you're really talking about tyranny versus freedom, and in that case, I think the vast majority of us are actually left. The whole idea that a communist and a fascist are not basically one and the same, I think, is just complete garbage. So
Right.
Amash, I think, represents that extreme, actually extreme left, traditional left, which is that classical liberalism, the idea that you are actually pro freedom, and in that case, he actually would be extreme left. So I
Right.
just don't follow that entire paradigm. I think it's outdated and it's garbage. And certainly I don't think anybody really regards libertarians as extreme right, at least not in the traditional sense. Nobody thinks a libertarian is a fascist. They're completely opposite of fascist.
Yeah, and now actually there's a lot of people who are viewing people like us, people who are libertarians, as being sort of centrist because we're not like the populist Trump right, and we're definitely not like the Bernie left. And so where are we? Well, we're just kind of in the sensible middle. And it's kind of a funny place to be. But let's go down his policies. He is 100% pro-life. He is pro Second Amendment. He is a budget hawk. That used to be the formula for Republicans: pro-life, pro-gun, anti-deficit. And Trump has governed as being pro-life. He's kind of come around on that issue. He has not been great on the Second Amendment, but certainly compared to Joe Biden, he's better on the Second Amendment than Joe Biden is, or at least in rhetoric, he will be. And on the budget, everybody's the same. Just blow up the budget. The sky is the limit. Just spend as much as you want. But uh, a lot of the
Trump has been horrendous on the budget.
yeah,
Trump has been absolutely horrendous. I don't
yeah,
know if I agree with you. I don't know if I agree with you about the Second Amendment. I think he's been very good for the Second Amendment, my personal opinion. But he's blown the budget up, and there's no doubt about that. And everybody's blown the budget up. Unfortunately, even starting with Ronald Reagan, I think Ronald Reagan had good reasons to blow up the budget because he was trying to destroy communism and defeat the
right.
Soviet Union through economic means rather than military means.
And he said
But
that explicitly.
and I've heard many accounts that he considered that his great failure, not being able to decrease the deficit during his time as president. But the fact of the matter is, everybody's been blowing up the. I should even go farther. We can go all the way back to Franklin Roosevelt. Everybody's been blowing the budget up, Republican or Democrat, for years and years and years. I mean, the last surplus we had was actually under Clinton, right? That was the last time we had a budget surplus, and that was a Republican-controlled Congress with a Democratic president. So they can both take credit for that, I think.
Yeah,
But we haven't had that since then. We haven't had any kind of fiscal responsibility since Bill Clinton, quite frankly.
yeah, and I think, look, right now, the people that Justin Amash appeals to are disaffected Republicans, people who probably weren't going to vote for Trump anyway, and they're going to vote for the Democrat not because they're left, not because they believe in Joe Biden, but because it's anybody but Trump. And so that's why I think Amash would hurt Trump less than he would hurt Biden. Why on net it's going to be a Biden win, not
Well,
because
I'll tell you this. I'll tell you this, Pete. I reached out to a friend of mine who used to be a local. He used to be the president of a local young. What is it? Young Americans for Liberty. Y'all, I think is the organization that
yeah, that
they're on.
was
They're on.
the Ron Paul organization, wasn't it?
Well, they're all over the place, and they traditionally draw from both libertarians and Republicans. You know, basically young Republicans, and I don't think there is a young libertarians. They tend to go into that organization. Anyway, my friend was the president of one of the local chapters at one of the junior colleges here, and I've reached out to him numerous times about this issue because he's a Biden supporter. He hates Trump. He's a never Trumper.
Right.
And I was like, well, now that Amash is going to come in, are you going to go with him? Because ideologically, he's much closer to you than Biden is. I mean, Biden doesn't agree with you on anything. You're just a never Trumper. And we do get into it, and it does get a little heated because I think he is just a never Trumper. And the funny thing is he's like, no, I'm not going to support Amash. I'm Biden all the way. Biden, Biden, Biden. And this is someone who, you know, has great credentials as a small L libertarian. You know, as far as he was actually the president of a local chapter when he was going to college. So that's kind of why I've been asking you this question is I don't know if I really believe that Amash is going to draw more from Biden or Cuomo, whoever the candidate is, than Trump.
Well, yeah, early polling indicates that is what's happening in Michigan. When they include Amash in the polling, then Biden's lead goes down. And so we don't know for sure that's what's that's the trend that's going to continue. But so far, that's what the data suggests.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That is interesting. But then again, that's his home state, correct? I mean, that's
right.
That's where Amash represents is in Michigan. So
yeah, and he won't probably be a factor in other states. And so you know, it does help. It does help Trump in Michigan. Will it help him in Wisconsin? Yet to be seen. It may be that Amash gets zero traction and he's just a non-factor, that Jesse Ventura is a non-factor. On the other hand, people know who Jesse Ventura is.
No, Jesse Ventura is going to be very. I feel like we have to have a whole show about Jesse Ventura because he is such an oddball. I mean, really. But the fact of the matter is, Jesse Ventura has credentials, whether you like him or you don't. You know, he was the governor of the state. He has served as an executive before, so he's a real interesting person. You know what I mean? I have my issues with
independent thinker, and in a time when neither party, you know, Trump came in saying, "Hey, I think different. I think outside of the box. I'm going to represent people who haven't been represented," and to a large degree, he has come through on that. But Jesse Ventura has the credentials to do the same thing, which is reach out to people, different people than Trump reaches out to. Obviously, they're very different types of candidates, but to reach out to people who right now are not represented at the national level and say, "Hey, I speak for you." And so he is, as far as I'm concerned, Ventura is a complete wild card. I think as a Green, he would pull from Biden, but as somebody who was formerly a member of the Reform Party, maybe he does have some of those same instincts as Trump does and can reach out to some of those same constituencies and cut into Trump's baits. We have no idea because we're just getting started. But right now, I would say things look very bleak for Donald Trump. I think he has missed his window to reach out to independents. And so even though it's early, I think everything favors the Democrats going into November. But there are just a few wildcards out there that have given Trump a path towards victory in the past couple of weeks. Because I've been saying since last August that Trump is going to lose.
Well, let's talk about one more wild card here, okay? Because obviously the Trump is going to lose is a narrative that there's plenty of people that are putting out there. So, but I'm interested in this libertarian race a little bit because Amash resisted this for quite a while, and then it seemed to me like he came out of nowhere. There was some speculation he might run as an independent. That was the last thing I ever saw. Not that he would run as a libertarian. He has not ever declared himself as a libertarian until last week.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of chatter or a lot of big L libertarians, because I should qualify that, the members of the Libertarian Party, which I am not, and I don't claim to be, but I have voted libertarian in numerous elections, and I'm talking big L libertarian. But the thing is with Amash, there was a great deal of speculation that he might run as an independent. He's resisted declaring himself part of the Libertarian Party for quite a while, I think with good reason, because I've had experiences with the Libertarian Party that make me, that's why I'm not a member. And, but the funny thing is, coming out of nowhere, there were other candidates that were establishing themselves for the Libertarian Party nomination. And we were talking off the air about Larry Sharp and how he was running actually as for the vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party, because they do these combined tickets. And I haven't heard about who Amash wants as his VP. Should he? Well, he says he's going to run, so whoever, I haven't heard who he's going to run with. You were talking earlier off the air about who Larry Sharp is running with, and Larry Sharp is someone that I think is well respected within big L libertarian circles, but I think a lot of the small L libertarians also like Larry Sharp because he tends to be very reasonable and very respectful of people that don't agree with him about everything. And that's my big criticism of most big L libertarians is if you don't agree with every single thing they say. And ironically, these are people who advocate voluntarism, in other words, not using coercion and force. But if you disagree with one single thing with them, they basically call you a statist and throw you out of the room and tell you they don't want to associate with you anymore. That's why I think that's the big failure of the big O Libertarian Party, as far as I'm concerned. But Larry Sharp's not like that. Larry Sharp is not like that. He's very inclusive. He's very articulate. And I even tried to reach out to him on a tweet about, well, what are your plans now that we've got the Amash in the room, as I put here on the graphic, the Amash in the room. You kind of have to acknowledge that because this is a sitting congressman. The National Libertarian Party has embraced him and basically said, we now have a libertarian in Congress, which, they do and they don't, because he was not elected as a libertarian, but he has become a libertarian. And therefore, there is now an L next to his name when you do the little rosters of the party affiliations of the different members of Congress. And, some people are very proud of that. And some people are like, well, Amash has kind of come into the party a little bit late here.
Right. So and you have some really strong candidates for the Libertarian nomination. I mean, it's a minor party nomination, so it almost feels a little silly to talk about these big candidates. But Jacob Hornberger, who I think doesn't have a great name for politics, but be that as it may, he has said, hey, when push came to shove, when you had this $2 trillion bill in Congress, Justin Amash voted present. That's not very libertarian. And so Justin Amash is not a straight libertarian. He's not a doctrinaire libertarian. He is a true independent thinker, which I think makes him a wild card in this race. Judge Jim Gray is running with Larry Sharp. I think Larry Sharp would be a very good candidate for exactly the reasons that you laid out, which is that he's very articulate. He's very diplomatic. His way of expressing himself, he did very well in New York for a third-party candidate. And I think that really speaks to his character and to his viability as a national candidate. And I think in a race like this, where you have very high negatives for both nominees for the major parties, or I should say presumptive nominees for the major parties, an independent candidate has a real chance to make a dent.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Like I said, I wasn't even aware that Ventura was in the race or potentially. Now, has he formally said, like, does he have an exploratory committee and all that?
I believe so. I'll have to verify that, but I believe so.
Because I know Amash does. I've seen Amash's links and all that he does have. Right. He's officially in there. So
Amash won a lot of support from Democrats because he opposed Trump, because he supported the impeachment. And you had the other libertarians in Washington, Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, whom we've spoken about a lot on this show. They were against the impeachment because they said it's a partisan thing. This isn't legitimate. And Amash said, no, look, these are legitimate claims. And I think they're both right from a certain perspective. I think Amash was right on the law that you could impeach Trump, but you could have impeached Obama. Obama did much worse things than what Trump did during his time in office. There were many more reasons to impeach Obama. Obama said, I don't have the authority to unilaterally make border policy. And then he unilaterally made border policy. So by his own standards, by his own admission, he was violating his oath of office. He violated the law. He violated the Constitution. And yet Congress never voted to impeach him. Well, because Nancy Pelosi was the Speaker of the House. But even Republicans weren't really saying, we should impeach him, and they should have been.
No, that's another show we could have. Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
I could
So
go
that's
through all sorts
yeah,
of things that Obama did. But I want to make something clear too, is Amash is a never Trumper. Amash
yes,
has always been a never Trumper, and he's biased in that regard. And I'm just
right,
going to say that. Whether you may not agree with that, but I think he's very biased. He's very much a never Trumper. I
yeah,
really I followed him for years and years and years, and he is a never Trumper.
right. And I've given to his congressional campaigns, and I've been a big supporter in years past. But I think you're right. I think this bid for president doesn't make a lot of sense. I think it is very much a never Trump thing, and I think the practical effect is it's going to boomerang. It's going to accomplish nothing. And let's sort of lay out the possibilities here. The best case scenario, I suppose, would be if he actually won. That's not going to happen. What
If who
else?
won? If who won?
That Amash won. I mean, I suppose if he won the presidency, that's his best case scenario. But we all know that's not going to happen. So what else could happen? Well, let's say he runs and Trump loses, Joe Biden wins, or whoever the Democratic nominee is. Well, that's not going to get the changes, the reform within the Republican Party that Amash wants. And so I think it's just self-defeating that it would make the Republican Party more populist, more Trump supporting, because they say, we were stabbed in the back by those libertarians. They're not Republicans. They're not part of our coalition. And so we need to kick them out. And so the Republican Party becomes smaller and it becomes less friendly to liberty. So that doesn't move the needle in your direction. And what if Trump wins anyway because he takes votes away from Biden? Well, then what was the point? If you're a never Trumper and you help Trump get elected, how could that possibly be a good outcome for you? So I think this is a lose, lose, lose situation where nothing good can come out of him running for the nomination against Trump, even on his own terms. Even if you try to,
I will say this though, Pete. You know, the Libertarian Party is a legitimate party, and they have every right to run their own candidate for the
they
office
do,
of president, and somebody has to do it. You know what I mean?
right?
I think Amash is in the strongest position to take that nomination, being a sitting congressman. That gives him a great deal of credibility. And talking about the Greens with Ventura, Ventura is a former governor, and that gives him credibility. They got to run
Yeah.
somebody.
Well, sure.
I am definitely an advocate of third parties. I don't concede the fact that the two main parties have to win all the time. It's just historically that's what's happened. So that doesn't mean it has to always be like that, though.
Right. But the time to run for the Libertarians, in my opinion, would have been 2016, not 2020. When they ran Gary Johnson. Now, Gary Johnson had previously been a governor of New Mexico, not the biggest state, but it's not like he ran for governor of Wyoming, where you can bake everybody brownies and win the election. Okay, it's a fairly
now
large state.
that's not a nice statement there, Pete. Come on.
My point is there aren't many people who live in Wyoming. You have to run it's a large campaign. It's a large undertaking. Is my point. Nothing against Wyoming. I'm saying not a lot of people live there. And so it gives a little bit of credibility when you've won a race that big with that many voters. But what we saw was, I don't know, maybe Gary Johnson smoked too much pot or something.
That's exactly what I thought. I thought he was high every single time I saw him in an interview. He looked high. I've dealt with people that are high throughout my career. He looked high every single time I saw him speak. And then, of course, he had the Aleppo moment that was just destroyed his campaign. Completely destroyed it. Yeah.
I thought, I could. Yeah, the Aleppo moment in isolation, he could have maybe recovered from. It was sort of a gotcha thing where they changed topics on him and he thought it was an acronym. And okay, everybody has a brain freeze now and then. But the tongue thing where he started talking through his tongue, I'm not going to try to imitate it because it's just too annoying.
This was after his CNN town hall that I tuned into with excitement, where his vice presidential candidate said what a great person Hillary was, and I turned it off. And I said, "You just lost every single Republican, you stupid idiot." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
By saying that, you're coming out defending Hillary Clinton when you
Who's
want
a terrible human being.
When you want to take Republican votes. And by the way, I just want to make this clear. I voted for Gary Johnson in the previous election as a protest to Ron Paul being excluded from the from the Republican convention. I did not vote for Mitt Romney. I voted for Gary Johnson. But when it came to 2016, I thought Gary Johnson was a mess, an absolute mess, and I wasn't going to vote for him. There was just no way. But I voted for him
Yeah,
before, but I was not going to vote for him in 2016. And I think he and Weld completely botched that election for the Libertarians because they could have had a real effect with two former Republican governors if they really went after Hillary and showed themselves as the alternative to Trump. They probably could have won some states. They probably could have
right.
actually gotten some electoral votes.
Right. Yes, exactly. If you had run a serious candidate in 2016, somebody who wasn't going to get high, and Gary Johnson has talked about how he smokes pot, and I think you're absolutely dead on. He was high. But if you had run a serious candidate, somebody that the voters could take seriously, then you would have a chance to take some votes from Hillary, take some votes from Trump, and run as a legitimate third party candidate. And once you break that sort of 10%, 20% mark in the polls, then people will realize, oh, this guy has a chance. But if you're going to get high and talk through your tongue and mix up what's going on in Syria, people are not going to take you seriously. And so the libertarians threw away their best chance ever to win electoral votes to make a difference in an election. And this year, I just don't see how the dynamics work in their favor. I think you have Trump's base is scared to death of Biden being elected, or at least they're scared to death of losing. And you have a lot of Biden support are just afraid of Trump winning. And so it's going to be really hard for a third party candidate to break through, even though both the candidates from the major parties have high negatives. We have yet to see them be a big impact nationally. That may change, but right now, my feeling is this either goes nowhere or it's completely counterproductive.
And you could be right. Yeah, definitely could be right.
Well, we've gone way over time, and we could talk about this, I think, for hours because we both feel very emotional about this. The nomination process is broken. There's no reason why Biden should be the nominee for the Democrats. It's an absolute travesty, and the fact that this Tara Reade thing hasn't sunk his campaign, I think, says it tells you everything you need to know about how broken our system is. He should have dropped out last month. This is just an absolute national disgrace that Joe Biden is a nominee for a national party. He is senile. Um, he has no policies. He has no platform that anybody's getting behind. He's just an empty suit. He's a warm body and barely warm body that they're putting in front of the American people. And this isn't how America's supposed to be run. And again, not to I bash the boomers a lot, but all of our nominees, except for Justin Amash, are boomers right now. You know, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, all boomers. What is going on? When are the Gen Xers and the millennials going to get some traction here? Because we do need new ideas, and we do need to have somebody who can think further ahead than let's keep blowing up the military budget. Let's keep spending $1 trillion every year on Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid. We need to reform these systems before it gets too late. And you know, we can't wait another 20 years, which is my fear, is that we're going to wait 20 years before there's any political will to fix these problems. And it makes me really worry for the future of the country.
No, I agree with you there. There's some major systemic problems that we're not addressing, and they're not going to get addressed as a result of this election either. So,
Yeah, and Trump came in promising to be different, and in many ways he has been very different. We've seen his style certainly of governing is very different, but he hasn't had the courage to take on these really systemic issues of national security spending, of healthcare. He kind of left it in Paul Ryan's hands, and Paul Ryan couldn't get the job done. Trump was not very effective behind the scenes in pushing through a legislative agenda, and then we lost the House in 2018. It wasn't as bad as it could have been, but it was an omen for 2020 is going to be a real uphill battle for the Republicans. So I think Trump needs to focus on his strengths, which are manufacturing, national security, protecting the homeland. This coronavirus thing sort of encapsulates all of that, and he needs to latch onto that as his campaign theme. I'm the wartime president. I'm about putting America first, and he needs to stop going on Twitter and announcing like he's Merv Griffin that he's going to give away ventilators to Ecuador and El Salvador and Honduras and you know, enough of that. Do what you said you were going to do. Be America first, because that's the president that the American people want right now. That's the president that the American people need right now. And the promise is there. The seeds are there for a really great campaign, but he cannot get out of his own way. So, with all that said, we are way over time. This is a record breaking episode. This is our equivalent of Alex Jones going on the Joe Rogan Experience. But thank you for tuning in, everybody who's tuned in. We really appreciate your comments and your viewership, and we want you to be part of the conversation. So please let us know what you think about these issues, what you think about Justin Amash, what you think about Jesse Ventura, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, because this is a really crazy time for our country right now. And for the past hour and 45 minutes, I've been Peter Maines. I'm here with Eric Alexander. You guys out there, you keep flying free.